that I was new to Fort Worth and was doing oral history research. I've been doing research for my dissertation at Duke for a long time before that. It included somewhere around 100 interviews with African Americans, Mexican Americans, and other activists from the civil rights era. And so I was doing that work. Once I came to TCU, I was doing it with my students. We started collecting interviews in the Fort Worth area in those different communities. And I reached out to some of my friends and colleagues in the area who were also doing work in civil rights history. So Marvin Delaney, who's down at the end here, professor of history at UT Arlington, and someone who'd been involved working on African American history, mostly in Dallas and around Texas, chair of the history department there as well. Todd Moy, who is a professor of history at the University of North Texas and a well-known civil rights historian and runs the UNT oral history program, and Jose Angel Gutierrez, who's here with us, who, in addition to being a movement icon, had run the Tejano Voices project at the University of Texas at Arlington, and it had helped me a lot along my way in developing as a scholar. And so together we came together and started talking about how we could collaborate, not step on each other's toes, and continue to expand the project, how we might do oral history work and make that oral history work available to a larger public. And there were several problems that I had identified, I think, early on that I shared with these collaborators, that if we're going to go ahead and collect, well, we need to find a way to do it together. We need to collaborate. We need to find a way to scale it, hopefully, around the state, and that means we need money to help us do that. And we need to try to address some of the issues with oral history research generally. Right? And those aren't as much about the veracity of sources, because I'm not concerned about that. I don't think oral history is any less useful an evidence than other forms of historical evidence, or that the archive's any more constructive or anything like that. But rather that what often happens with oral history research is people go out and conduct the interviews, and then the interviews disappear. Right? They get archived maybe, they sometimes get transcribed, they get, in the best of cases, they are put in some kind of online project where they stream as a full interview, but they're not easy to work with. They're not easy to find for most people, and they're really not easy for the general public to use, right? If you're a scholar and you have time to sift through hours and hours of interviews, pages and pages of transcripts, you might find what you're looking for. But for the general public, for teachers, for journalists, for lawyers, for educators, for undergraduates, for people who are looking for narrow information on a very narrowly defined subject, they're very difficult to use. Right? You might be able to look through a couple transcripts, but you can't find everything related to, say, sit-ins in Tyler, Texas, or if we wanted to say black-brown relations at the work site in Houston, right? You can't find information across an entire collection from a variety of different speakers. And so we came up with this web platform that was built by the people at TCU's digital library that tries to address some of that, and you can kind of see how it works. So we went out and did the research, and that's an ongoing project, and then we also built this website that displays, instead of full interviews, clips from the interviews. And each clip has its own subject data, metadata, right, with a controlled vocabulary of terms, as well as tags that you as users could add, or that we add during processing. So this one deals with low-income housing, and if I were to click on that, you would see other clips that deal with low-income housing, and then you could filter it by place and so forth. And I'll just invite you all to go to the website and play with the search functionality on your own. But our hope is that this is going to make this information much more accessible than comparable oral history projects or civil rights history projects, and therefore much more useful to the world at large. That's all I'm going to say about the technology of it. We're very lucky to get support from a number of different sources from our institutions. We started this website by uploading interviews from our existing collections, from my book project, from Marvin's project, from Jose Angel's project, from Todd Moy's work at UNT. And then this past summer, with support from the Brown Foundation and the Summerlee Foundation, we hired this group of people here to go out and do interviews all summer long. And they did it full time. They spent a couple months in the field, and they came back with about 115 new interviews, all of them video recorded. They went, one group to the Rio Grande Valley, to Laredo and to El Paso, and another group to all sorts of backwaters in East Texas, but also Tyler, Longview, Marshall, Bryan, Hempstead, Huntsville, so all over that region. And so we're interested in looking at the two civil rights movements, the African American civil rights movement and sort of the long Chicano movement. We're interested in looking at them comparatively and also relationally, looking at black-brown relations. And the sites that we covered this summer, there wasn't a whole lot of those relations, and you'll hear a little bit about that. In the urban areas, there's much more, and kind of along the Gulf Coast, there is much more of that history, and we're going to continue to uncover that. We received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities, a collaborative research grant to keep working on it, and so next summer we'll be hiring many more grad students and going out and conducting research at many more sites as we move forward. So that's it, I think, in the way of introductions. This is really a first look from the field. We haven't gotten together since August. We haven't really talked at all about it, but each of the students to my left have compiled some piece of this story, and it's very much a work in progress, both in terms of our collecting of data, our analyzing it, and are getting the information up on the website. So that's a work in progress too. But do feel free to visit it at crbb.tcu.edu, and feel free to do whatever you want with what you find there, right? It's all open access. Full interviews will be at the portal to Texas History. So with that, I'll just introduce my co-panelists. So immediately to my left is Moises Acuna Gorola. Mo is finishing his master's, actually just defended his master's thesis at the University of North Texas under the direction of Beto Calderon and Todd Moy and others. And he's applying to PhD programs and going to go on and do great things. He wrote a thesis about the Molina neighborhood of Corpus Christi, where he also grew up. And that's a story that included the Chicano movement, but also African American history. To his left is David Robles. David is a native of the Valley who is now pursuing a PhD at the University of Texas at El Paso. And David's working on a dissertation about the FAR riot and the Chicano movement and sort of moving forward in FAR, Texas. And he'll tell us a little bit about that today. PHRRR, yes. Yeah. South Texas. Yeah. Catherine Bynum is a doctoral student at TCU, where she's doing work with me and others on women's history and civil rights in Dallas, Texas, and looking at a multiracial history of women and civil rights organizing in Dallas. And to her left is Sandra Enriquez. Sandra is finishing a dissertation very soon here under the direction of Monica Perales at the University of Houston. And Sandra is doing really cool work on El Paso and on the Chicano movement and the years since the Chicano movement in El Paso, and struggles over urban renewal, neighborhood revitalization, in quotes, and community control of that process. And then finally, Marvin Delaney, my colleague, department chair at UT Arlington of history, and we'll just go from there. So we don't have a lot of time for this many people to speak, so we're going to move quickly and hopefully be able to play some clips from the website for you all, and then try to save a little time for questions. So, Mo, you're up first.
Hi. So I was really interested in Bryan and College Station, one of the sites that we had visited. It wasn't after I watched some of these interviews that I started to sort of reimagine how I do my own history and how I think maybe a lot of us should probably start doing it as well. And this may seem obvious, but a lot of times when we look for black-brown political coalitions, whenever we don't find one, and I can't speak for everyone who does similar work, but I know a lot of times we kind of just skip over that area, and we just sort of see, oh, no coalitions, all right, next, and kind of move on. And I know this may seem obvious, but before any of that can happen, we need to get a real understanding of how the two groups got along with one another, and if they did, and if they were even exposed to one another, and if they shared spaces. So a lot of historians have argued that cultural dissimilarities, geographic distance, class distinctions, and political affiliations resulted in an overwhelming lack of black-brown unity across Texas. But when we kind of further the microscope on like smaller spaces, where there was no significant geographic distance and no real difference in class distinctions, we see a place where cultural dissimilarities are embraced, which allow the formation of political affiliations. So I guess what I'm trying to say is they need to get to know one another before any political coalitions could exist, and we should really take notice of how important those sort of exchanges are. So I have one clip from Velma Spivey. She's a retired social worker, and she's a curator of the Brazos Valley African American Museum. And she talks about sort of that first, I guess from her point of view, the relationship between the two groups when she was working out in the cotton fields. Let's see. Yeah, she describes what the colonias look like. In the interview, we say labor camps, but we would just understand them as colonias now. And she sort of even talks about that initial sort of tension that exists between groups when the two groups do not know each other. Which one? Parental, there. Starting from 313.
How did your parents meet? Did they ever share that with you?
I think when my mom was born,
Because white people in Bryan. What about Latinos? When was the first time you met a Mexican American or Tejano, Mexicano, however they chose to self-identify at any particular time?
you know what? We didn't have Hispanic people in our community. There were no white people either. But then we didn't. I guess I was a young mother. I was a mother, and my children had friends who were Hispanic, and they were in the neighborhood. As they were homeowners, and my children were friends with them even at Head Start. So there was one lady who would bring her kids over in the morning time for me to take to Head Start. And they would exchange. She would come, they'd bring the kids to my house, like two or three of them, and my kids would have, cereal and maybe some bacon and eggs or something like that. These kids would have tacos. They traded breakfasts. My children didn't have tacos. I didn't know how to make tacos. I didn't know nothing about them. So we were introduced, I was introduced to Hispanic people about the time my kids did. I don't remember in growing up. If we saw one, we just say, they don't speak our same language, so we don't know what they're saying and stuff. And even when we were going to the field, we were like segregated in the field. We didn't pick chop cotton along beside Hispanic people. We were in this field over here and they were in that field over there. So they dressed a little bit differently than us for the field. Strange thing, we had our attire. We always had on a hat and long sleeves or whatever. And it seemed like sometimes they had on hats, but they would always have a rag or something on their head. And I don't know why we didn't have something to keep the sweat out of our eyes already, because they just put it up about the sweat. But we didn't, and we would see them on the trucks, okay, when we stopped at the store to get some refreshments. We didn't call them refreshments back then, though, but we stopped at the store to get some refreshments. We would see them, they didn't speak to us, we didn't speak to them. And we didn't know what they were saying anyway. So, I don't know who thought somebody was better. I don't know. Maybe we thought we were better. I don't know. Because it would be more of them at the field than it would be us,
So her discussion kind of goes on to a next clip, but just to save time, we'll just go ahead. You can look it up. It's called Hispanic and Immigrant Work Conditions. She goes into further detail on that. So as much as Black Brown was a topic in our interviews in Bryan and College Station, we were unfortunately unable to speak to a lot of Latinos who were there for one reason or another. But we still were able to get a sense of what the Latino community looked like in Bryan from the perspective of African American residents. And in this next clip, Robert Person discusses what a lot of the team in the Valley were able to get interviews to talk about, and that's speaking Spanish in schools. I wasn't expecting at least to hear about this, but I did. And from Robert Person. From the beginning to 50.
That's when they started coming up with that we were going through some of the plights that we was going through. Some of the Hispanic students was going through the same thing, even though they were allowed to go to Stephen F. Austin it was like, hey, we're letting you in here, but and to the point where they couldn't even speak their native language. They didn't speak Spanish at school. I imagine that causes some problems later for them because you're speaking it at home, but when you get to school, you can't do it. But they adjusted, and when Little League was one of the things that made us realize that, because we had all black team, had all Hispanic team, you had all white team, but you had more white teams than you had black and Hispanic teams. So as a result of it, we usually had the better athletes on the black teams and Hispanic team. And when I was playing Little League, I was.
And so he goes on about segregation, and sort of in the next clip, you can also look it up. It's called Hispanic Neighborhoods in Bryan, interview with Robert Person. He sort of talks about there was still segregation in Bryan, but it was the black and brown communities that were desegregating, and yet the Anglo population was still disconnected from that part of the city. So in talking about, I guess, culture and social interactions leading up to political coalitions, I want to skip a few decades and sort of end up to our then present. And the interesting thing about oral histories is that they serve multiple purposes. They're kind of a time capsule for what was going on at that particular time. It's more than just a recollection of previous dates, but also we get a sense of what was happening on the day of the interview itself. And that can help us a lot in the future, especially with this one. When Al Saenz is talking about sort of work between black and brown communities for, I guess, more social justice-oriented stuff. And you can start to clip out one.
So what about organizations with part of, and I give a lot of credit to Councilman Lafayette. He's the councilman for District 2 as well. It used to be African American district. It still is predominantly. But he won it over an African American. In a way, District 1, which is the district that I represent in the city of Bryan, was designed to be won in many ways by Hispanic because of the predominant population. The dominant population in that area is Hispanic. Makes sense. District 2, African American. Makes sense. This year or last year, Councilman Pena won an African American district, and he's Hispanic. But it's only because the previous councilman, who was African American, really didn't listen to the issues that were important to the African American community, and so Councilman Pena was able to come in and win it because he's a better candidate as well. So what he started and what we both started at the same time, but he had it there at the African American Museum. We started our monthly town hall meeting, and I used to have mine at the library. I had about 3 at the library, and he had his at the African American Museum. And so we decided, because he was getting more people than I were at his than I was at mine, said, Councilman, let me join you over there. And so what we started is a monthly town hall meeting at the African American Museum that brings the Hispanic district and the African American district together to discuss local issues pertaining to city services and government.
So yeah, to wrap up, I think it's really important for us to not overlook sort of the social and cultural things that go on between the two communities, because eventually, whatever we're looking for, the political coalitions, they grow out of those initial, that initial contact into something more like this. So yeah, I think we should just find more value in seeing the social and cultural things. Thank you.
Yeah, we can go now. My name is David Robles. I was part of Team B, which visited the Valley, Laredo, and El Paso, along with, Sandra was also in the team. But like Dr. Krockman said, my research focuses more on the far right in 1971, and I want to expand on just stopping in 1975, where most of the studies have stopped, and continue on this community study of what happened in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, how the city grew and how everything changed after the riot. So when I was offered this position, I said yes, and because, I knew a lot of people in the Valley that would be interested in the project. And throughout the project, I kind of found this one theme with some of the major individuals when we were interviewing in the Valley in Laredo. is that the city of Kingsville, Texas, was kind of like a mecca for Chicano ideologies in the 1970s, especially for Kingsville and I. We have Israel Reyes, who works in Laredo now in a nonprofit organization, who attended there. Rogelio Nunez, Efrain Fernandez, who was the leader of the FAR of the FAR protest in 1971 that led to a riot. So, I would start thinking, okay, how do they all relate to each other? But not only that, but how do their ideologies, kind of not agree with one another? Like Mr. What's his name? Narciso Aleman, who has a very distinct view on the Chicano movement. And then one of our many interviews with him, we had like about 4 interviews with him during the summer. The first one was an informal at a cafe, and that Saturday he talked so much about the Chicano ideology, the differences between Texas, California, New Mexico, and Colorado. And it was such a shame we didn't get it, on tape. But in this, one of the videos that I'm going to show you right now, he talks about, the distinction between him and Jose Angel Gutierrez at times, and some of his political viewpoints. If you want to...
The beginning?
Yeah.
The other thing, of course, is that, for example, Jose Angel Gutierrez, because it was majority-based, taught and thought of elections in terms of winning. Jorge, because he was a minority and couldn't win, thought of it in terms of philosophy, in terms of principles, in terms of values. Okay? And to be consistent and to uphold and live those values, those standards. Okay, so those were some of the differences, and having had a socialization and conditioning that was based on principles, I was closer to the philosophy of being principled and being consistent. So that appealed more to me, to a large extent because of the religious beliefs and practices of my father, who as a Jehovah's Witness believed that he was not of this world, that neither was his family, that we should not socialize with the rest of this world, that the reward and the promise was, in the hereafter. And so from a very young age, that was the orientation that I had. So when it came to this contradiction, my orientation was to the principles and the consistency. That, and in the conversation that I told you about on Saturday that Jose Angel Gutierrez and I had, in which he told me, in this movement we're either mandaderos or we're patrones and I'm a patron. I said, but what's the difference between what we have now with the gringos and what we're saying we want to impose? It's because we're going to be patrones. Well, to me there's not a difference. The color of the patron is not the difference. It is a distinction without a difference. Okay? There isn't, because I believe in having studied it.
So, it was a very interesting talk. Like I said, that Saturday before the interview, it was about an hour and a half talking about these ideologies of, between Texas and Colorado. Because he was, like he said, he was more into the whole issue of philosophy. He's talking about Corky Gonzalez's vision. Because he met Corky, he was with Corky in Colorado. And, to me it was very interesting, and, we were freaking out because, we understood that there's divisions between the Chicanos and the Chicano movement, but he kind of explained it to the T, and it was, to me, it's going to help me a lot in my own research. The second interview that I'm going to show, I know we're pressed for time, so I'm going to only cut it down to 2 interviews, is Rogelio Nunez. He was in Kingsville in the 70s, and, his interview was about 3.5 hours. So we were kind of tired afterwards. That's a little, that's an understatement. But no, he talks about his political awakening, and you know, how he, you know, everybody in, you know, coming in like Israel Reyes, you know, Efrain, everybody coming into this one location in Kingsville, especially when Jose Angel Gutierrez went to speak, you know, it kind of woke something up. It kind of stirred something, you know, because we have a lot of individuals from Kingsville going to the Valley, Laredo, El Paso, you know, and other parts of Texas, you know, stemming from that origin point. And, you know, for Efrain Fernandez, like I said, he's one of the main individuals I'm focusing on my research. Unfortunately, we didn't get to interview him because he didn't, you know, call us back. And, but, you know, I just want to play a little clip, you know, just about, you know, his, you know, opinion about Kingsville. It's not working.
From the beginning?
Yeah.
You just uploaded?
No, it's
No,
not.
I uploaded that one this summer.
Let's retry.
Oh,
Uh-oh.
oh no, I didn't do it.
Got to Kingsville in 1970, and really that was by accident, because when I graduated, there was a couple of friends who were going to the military. I thought maybe I should go to the military. I hadn't taken any college entrance exam at that time with the ACT. I thought, well, you know what? And then my mother said, no, why don't you try college, you know? I said, well, I didn't take any of the exams. Well, you have some cousins in Kingsville. Okay, you have some cousins that are you know, through your father's side. Maybe you can go up there and they can orient you, whatever. And I said, okay, so I took a trip to Kingsville, met my cousins, all dropouts from high school. No college in that world. All, you know, again, great barrio folks, great raza. Actually, they had participated in the '68 walkout there in Kingsville. They knew about Mayo. When they said, "Hey, Mayo this," I said, "Like Mayo what?" I mean, I had no idea what Mayo was. That's how I can. But they were from that neighborhood, from the barrio of Kingsville, close to Gillette Elementary School, which was a kind of a haven for some of the barrio activists that were going to come out later on, or came out during the late '60s and early '70s. So I went and took the ACT. I did well. You know, and so then I enrolled at A&I, not knowing what to do, what to take, what classes. Nobody was telling me, like, take this class, take that class. All I knew is you line up, you start looking at classes. So I heard some people saying, like, you know, I want to take this business class. I said, well, you know, I'll take business classes. Took English 101, you know, the basic math, and I took a business class and I flunked. I didn't understand the world of business. You know. But I took a sociology class, which I liked. Kind of got into it, and you know, liked it. Second semester, no more business classes, you know, stick to the things you know how to do and so forth. And so then I went on. But then I had a real interesting professor, again, by the name of Stanley Whitaker, who I took a class from, and he's like, the professor in the Department of Sociology was teaching, what at that time was actually Sociology 307, Mexican American subcultures. You know, and he started talking about these things about, the La Unida Party and some character named Jose Angel Gutierrez, and like, you know, like, what is, to me it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense. It didn't make sense because I can reflect back to my high school years, and when I came out of high school, none of that was ever discussed in our school. Nobody walked out of something in high school. Okay? They walked out of Ed Couch, but they didn't walk out of something. So I had no clue. So when I take this class, it's kind of like what I often define for myself as a moment of like the contradiction. Like, you know, I didn't learn this in Texas history. I didn't learn this in U.S. history. And now I'm learning this from this guy. But then I also took another class with Jose Reina, Dr. Jose Reina, who taught the only ethnic studies class at that time. And then he gave us Occupy America and what we need to read. And so I go back and I start reading Occupy America, and Joel Quinn is saying that all that you learned in your public schools is not true. The Alamo, this is a different story. This guy's nuts. Throw it. That's not what I learned. One of the most memorable moments of my childhood growing up in San Benito, going to Landrum Elementary, was in the 6th grade, Miss Brandt. We're all going to go see the Battle of the Alamo, John Wayne, at the Rivoli Theater, which is down the street here. Because we're all going, 6th graders. So at the end, we come out and we're all clapping for John Wayne. He's the hero of the Alamo, the Battle of the Alamo. So that's what I learned, you know. And so I said, okay. But when Rodolfo Acuña comes into my world, and when Dr. Stanley Whitaker comes into my world, and then of course in the class with Jose Reina, I began to learn and meet other folks. There was a guy, Abel Cavada was in that class. Israel Reina was in that class. And these were other activists who were already active in Kingsville by the 70, 72, 73, 74.
Yeah, so I mean, his interview. I mean, it was just really quick, you know, about his political awakening. But it was very helpful. I mean, because he was literally kind of explaining to us you can see more online, but explain to us what the process of how these individuals, these activists, took, what classes they took, how did they get involved within their communities. So, which is very interesting. It's kind of like a little roadmap. And I was talking to Sandra. How we say, there's an immigrant map that you can follow. And I believe that, with further studies, we need a further study of this, but how these Chicano activists from Kingsville, how they spread out, where they went, what did they do, and create this roadmap of their activism. And, that was practically it. My view and my experience was very, very awesome working for this project,
We have more flyers up here if you need more. Catherine.
Good afternoon. My name is Catherine Bynum. I'm a PhD student at Texas Christian University. So when I was asked to partake in this project, one of the things that I was really interested in looking at were women's roles in these movements. And so I was really, when I was in the field, I was very frustrated with some of the people that were reaching out to us and were trying to get us different contacts. And a lot of them were just pointing us to men, and I kept saying, where are the women? Where are the women? Where are the women? And so, we kept asking the question, where are the women? And when we finally got names of some women and were able to locate their phone numbers, and we would call them, a lot of the women would say, no, I don't think my story is important. I didn't really do anything. And so we kept getting turned down over and over and over again. And I kind of wanted to know, why that was. And when we got back in August and I talked to Sandra and David, they shared similar experiences, that they would get turned down a lot. And so, I don't have a good explanation as for why that happened, but I also wanted to say that it's very important that we try to use different techniques to try to bring women in. So one of the techniques that I would try often was to say, well, I think women have very different viewpoints. We haven't heard these viewpoints in the past, and I think it's a really important contribution to our project that we get women's stories as well. And sometimes they would go, oh, okay, I guess I can talk about it, and other times they would still say they weren't interested. But I have a couple of clips here that, I really wanted to show because I feel like if we get women, we can get some other stories that we weren't necessarily expecting. And I chose two different women. One that Sandra interviewed and one that I interviewed. The one that I interviewed was Frances Riso in Dallas, Texas. She was married at the age of 15. She dropped out of high school at that time, and she had her first child at 16. She ended up having 3 children over 10 years. She became active in politics because her husband worked for a garage door company, and they decided to bring in the union. And her husband wanted to have her go and speak to the female employees of the company to get them to unionize. And because she was a mother and she had children, she was also very active in the PTA. She was also part of the Mexican American Political Association. She was very active in voter registration drives. And when I was doing my research on Frances Riso, one of the things that I had read about were these conferences that she had attended. And one of the conferences that she created in Dallas in 1977 was this biracial conference. Now, I was trying to get to some of these other conferences that she was talking about, and ended up coming up with a story that I was not expecting to get. And so if we can play the clip, Domestic Violence.
They had to do with reproductive rights. They had to do with the church, registering to vote, getting involved in the school system, all of those things that I wound up doing. And they had to do with some domestic violence, because domestic violence was a humongous issue, and it was hard to talk about domestic violence at La Razonida conferences because the men were there. And I'm not proud of my lying, but I had to. It was the only way I could manage it. I wound up a volunteer on the task force that eventually organized the first battered women's shelter in Dallas that became the family place. But I would tell my husband I was going to a PTA board meeting downtown. So he never knew I was on that task force. I would have gotten beat up if he'd known about it. So, yeah, all of those workshops we could do when they were women's conferences.
You felt like men weren't going to be receptive in some way, or?
No, because a lot of the women that were victims, were having to survive this with their husbands, would get in trouble. But if it was a women's conference and it was about family and the schools and health and like that, it was okay. But in those health education classes, we talked, about their rights to control their own bodies. And we weren't talking about abortion, because Latinas are basically Roman Catholic, and more so back then. We weren't talking about abortion rights. We were talking about that you shouldn't have to get pregnant, or you can take birth control, and under certain circumstances you can, and how to work with the church so that, because a lot of the women would, if the priest said you don't take birth control pills, by golly, they weren't going to, or they would get it. They felt they would get excommunicated.
So, do you think you consider yourself a feminist, or?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Because in the paper you said you weren't about women's liberation.
Well, you have to understand the time. And I was married, and I was a victim of domestic violence. Okay, that's why I'm able to say to you the things that I'm saying to you and how we had to get it done. Okay, so yeah, I was a feminist. Of course I was a feminist, but I couldn't say that to a reporter. And of course I was for women's liberation. I couldn't wait to get liberated from the father of my children. But I went to the priest for 5 years for counseling. And for 5 years he said, forgive and pray and be patient, forgive and pray and be patient. And it got to be like a tape recording. And I finally said, to hell with this. I was about to, I'm just, God help me, God didn't let me kill him. Really serious. It was, something was going to give. And I prayed and prayed and prayed, and God said, don't kill him. Leave. So I packed me and my kids up and we left.
So it's a little rough stuff, but I think it's an important story that needs to be told, especially when we're talking about civil rights and women's rights especially. The next clip that I wanted to talk about was an interview that Sandra did while they were stationed in Edinburgh. It's Ofelia de los Santos. So De Los Santos grew up in Edinburgh, is that right? Yeah, she grew up in Edinburgh, and she got married about 2 years after she graduated from high school. And while her husband was getting his PhD, she was having children and staying at home and raising. And she sort of started to feel like maybe there was something more that she could be doing. She just said she was feeling like she was just, staying at home all the time. She wasn't doing anything for herself, and she kept questioning, is there more to her life? And so this one clip that I wanted to play, it's at the Hidalgo County Women's Political Caucus. It talks about the formation of that political caucus and how it was received amongst women and also men in the movement.
And then I met some women that said, why don't we form a Mexican-American or a women's political caucus? It couldn't be Mexican-American because we had a lot of Anglo women that were at the university. One of them was the wife of the editor of the Monitor at the time, Barbara King. And we became good friends, and so we women decided to form this organization. Well, it created a big problem with our husbands, because our husbands were Mexican Americans, Chicanos, La Raza, and so we were joining a white women's movement, to quote my husband. And I remember telling him, but it's not just a white women's movement, because Mexican American women are also getting, oppressed by the husbands, the boyfriends, the men. And he was like, no, you know what you're talking about. Now, this is an educated person, but uneducated in political activism of women. But we women went ahead with it, and we started the organization and we got very involved.
What was the name of the organization?
It was Hidalgo County Women's Political Caucus.
And what year was this formed?
That would have been 1980.
How did you get involved?
Well, we were the founding members.
No, but how did you get involved on campus as a group and in the community?
In the community. We would meet in McAllen and women would come from the women came from the different organizations that we were members of. And in La Jolla, La Jolla was a very political town run by Big Leo. We called him Big Leo, Billy Leo's father. Mr. Leo was a very smart man, smart enough to understand and not be threatened by women's political activism. He gave us our initial kind of like blessing, and so the women couldn't do too much about it. The husbands weren't too happy about it, but I took 9 women from La Jolla with me to the first meeting of the formation of the Women's Political Caucus. One of them was Maria Luisa Garcia, who I recommend that you interview.
We've been trying to contact her, but her number's not working, so I need to re-ask you for her number.
Yes, I'll try to find play. But Maria Luisa Garcia.
So just
struggle
but yeah, so those are the 2 clips that I thought were the most important to show about women's experiences, how they differ from men, and kind of the struggles that they were facing, that something that would be unique to what men had faced. So thank you.
I guess I'm next. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. So over the course of the 8 weeks that we were on the field, David and myself, we went around Laredo, El Paso, and the Valley. And I noticed when you're interviewing so many people, you know, day after day, week after week, you start noticing trends. So I started noticing, you know, people being connected across time and space. And to me, something that really caught my attention, and I think that's interesting that we've all kind of been going off of what we're interested as a scholar. So for me, I'm interested in community control organizations, so that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And it's the amount of stories that we got about community control organizations, especially in the border areas, which is an area that is very neglected by the state of Texas and also by, you know, by the federal government. So even though the areas that we studied had a lot of victories in the electoral process during the 1960s and 70s, many Chicanos throughout the state of Texas succeeded in carving out social spaces that, you know, benefited particular communities through different social services when federal, local, state, and federal authorities failed to do so. The Chicano movement fueled a lot of these community controlled spaces, and they were just simply formed in order to, you know, provide just basic education. Narciso Liman is one of the founders of Colegio Jacinto Treviño, which is the first Chicano institution of higher education, and clinics, because people had no services in their barrios, or just social services, housing, etc., and that really interested me. And so some of these institutions, unfortunately, disappeared when the Chicano movement lost its momentum at the latter half of the 1970s, excuse me. But several organizations continued, and they prevailed and still continue to serve the community to this day. So something that I'm really interested in looking at after I'm done with my dissertation is the legacy and the continuation of these community controlled spaces and how they redefine our perceptions of whether or not the Chicano movement was a success or a failure. So the first clip that I'm going to show you, it's in El Paso. I'm from Juarez, and I grew up in El Paso, moved like many people do in El Paso. So I moved over to the United States, and working in a segundo barrio for my own project made me interested in this particular story. So this is the story of La Fe Clinic, and in El Paso, Mexican Americans were often segregated to the south side. So in communities like a segundo barrio, people did not have a readily access to a hospital. Many of them didn't have cars, and the general hospital, Thomason General Hospital, was 4 miles away. ambulances never made it on time, so people died. And as one of our interviewees, Homero Galicia, said, a lot of people distrusted this institution because people believed that, quote, la gente iba a morir ahí, or people went there to die. And so a group, in 1967, a group of women, single mothers, single parents, and abuelitas and grandmas, created a Father Ram clinic, which now is La Fe Clinic. And this summer we interviewed the CEO, who is Salvador Valcorta. And Salvador Valcorta started as a youth organizer in the 1970s in La Fe. So he has been there seeing it grow to the institution that it is today. So I just wanted to show you the formation of La Fe.
And can you tell us about the origins of La Fe for the people that don't know about it?
Oh, sure. La Fe was started in 1967 by different groups of parents in the neighborhood, mainly the Ochoa Parents Association. And they started in a one-room tenement clinic. They had some volunteer doctors, mainly Dr. Raymond Galdea and Dr. Raul Rivera. At times, Dr. Pablo Ayub would come in later on. This organization started to grow. The organization was built mainly by single parents. They felt that they wanted a better life for their families, for their kids, wanted a life of, not where their kids were not involved in gangs and drugs and violence, in prison, in death. Because within the same family sometimes there have been those issues. Mm-hmm. And, there's a story that's told that, a little girl was coming to buy some soda. At that time, you had to take a deposit, a bottle with you to get your soda. She tripped, she fell, she cut herself, and, they weren't able to get an ambulance in on time. They weren't able to get her to care on time, and she died. And that sparked a big movement within the area to get a clinic. And the women that were involved in the clinic, in starting the clinic and pushing for professionals to come in and write the grants and write, the abstracts and the proposals. And let me say that I say the women were the founders, because I think founders are the people with the visions. Mm-hmm. I think founders are the people with the ideas. I think founders are the people that create the movement. It's not the person that writes the grant, because a lot of times that happens, You get the guy that writes the grant or the woman that writes the grant, and all of a sudden they become the founders. They were told by somebody to write that grant, unless they're the visionary and the dreamer, and then they were themselves at the grant. Then that's where they're the founders. That's why nosotros we depict the history as a single mother, single mom, single dad.
So he goes on to talk about how they named the clinic after Father Ram, who was a Jesuit priest that arrived in the barrio in the 1950s, and he just revolutionized the area, stopped gang activities as he was providing recreational activities for the youth. So the La Fe today continues, and they even have a charter school. The institution has grown so much. They provide many services throughout the area. And this is one of the interviews that we're working on uploading. So it's a two-parter. So stay tuned for the rest of the interview. Now I want to move to Laredo. And in Laredo in the late 1970s, the Azteca Barrio was one of the oldest residential areas in Laredo. And this to me struck because my dissertation is about the protection of residential areas. But the Azteca was struggling to stay alive after the city had constructed an international bridge that connected the two border cities of Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, as well as a HUD plan through the urban UDAG, which is the Urban Development and Action Grant, to redevelop impoverished areas. So they were threatening the livelihood of this neighborhood. And as a result, the community organized in hopes of preserving the space they had inhabited for so long. So in 1982, residents formed the Azteca Economic Development and Preservation Corporation in order to preserve the residential and economic integrity of the area, as well as the cultural roots of the neighborhood. The organization has created affordable housing and financial opportunities for its residents, and I want to show you a clip from Rafael Torres explaining what the community organization has done for the Barrio Azteca throughout the years.
So the thinking of the group was, okay, so we've done this work with community members, so do we just go home and declare victory, or do we get something going? So that's why we formed this nonprofit organization.
So can you talk about the creation of the nonprofit and what has the organization been doing around the community?
Okay, so it's 1982. We formalized with the usual corporate filings in Austin, and eventually got our exemption status from the IRS. We're active for 3 or 4 years, pretty much just organizing in the neighborhood, and then we were able to secure some funds in 1988. Did some small rental assistance, some utility payments, and ventured into putting a pretty significant several $million housing deal using housing tax credits, using the help of the FLCIO Housing Trust Fund, securing some money from the city and some money from the state. Took about 24 months. We did the construction of the 50 units in 96. And I think our first tenants moved in 1997. We've been there for 17 years, providing housing for 50 families. We've built some other units with some other funds that we've identified, also for low-income housing. So in total, we've been providing housing for the last 18 years.
Just in the community in Azteca?
So he continues to talk about how the funds that they're getting now essentially also require social services in return of providing funds for housing. So what they're doing now is using an IRS tax fund that you can get as a low-income family. They're getting back some money, and whatever money they get back, they're asking the residents to put it down as a down payment for a house, for school, or to start their own businesses. So they're trying to maintain these funds to be helpful to politically and socially and economically uplift the community. So I think that everything that we've presented so far and the interviews that we've done provide really exciting avenues for new research, and I'm really excited to have been part of this project and present this. And I am just hoping that the 2 interviews, and there was many more that I just obviously cannot show you in 10 minutes, but there's so many community-controlled institutions that came out of the Chicano movement because there was a lack of, or because people needed to have somewhere where to celebrate their cultural roots and cultural heritage. So I welcome you to just look around the website and hopefully find your next topic. Thank you.
Dr. Delaney.
Yes, sir. I'm actually going to defer to these graduate students, and I want to give them a hand for the work that they've done. And just make some concluding remarks so that we actually can have more of a discussion this evening. I've been studying racial politics in Dallas for about 30 years or so. As you can see, I'm the senior person up here, and there's no saying you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But I will say that with this project, and looking at some of the things we've been able to do the past 6 months, or actually the past year, with the Civil Rights in Black and Brown Project, I've learned a lot of new tricks. You know, the fact that we can post these clips and have them searchable using metadata is just fabulous and fantastic. I've been doing oral histories for about 40 years, so having this new technique, and as Max said earlier, you know, before you had to literally sit down and listen to the whole tape, or transcribe it yourself, or have someone else do it, and the process was just so cumbersome that you couldn't get it done in a way that you would be satisfied with. In fact, the way I met Mo, for example, was that he was doing transcribing some interviews that Dr. Gutierrez and I were trying to pull together, and of course I tease him now that I held up his paycheck for about 6 months for doing the transcripts because of our crazy system at the University of Texas at Arlington. But anyway, he got them done. But again, we don't have to do them like this anymore, and we can make them real accessible and tell these stories. One of the things I was going to do was talk about the interviews that Mo and Catherine did with the Medrano brothers, Robert and Ricardo, in Dallas, Texas. Of course, Robert and Ricardo got involved in politics. They became very important. In fact, they were called political bosses. You know, in Dallas, and again, in terms of racial politics, the city was dominated for about 35, 40 years by an organization called the Dallas Citizens Council. Some powerful white businessmen who controlled all of the elections, because all the elections were at-large elections. We didn't get an African-American on the city council until 1969. And of course, we got a Mexican-American woman, Anita Martinez, on the city council during the same year. And then the African-Americans and Mexican-Americans had to file at-large suits to get single-member districts in Dallas, 3 of them, all the way up to 1991 when we finally got the 14-1 plan in the city of Dallas. So indeed, we got African-Americans, 3 African-Americans, 2 Mexican-Americans on the city council. Well, of course, the Medranos, one served on the city council, one served on the school board, and of course, they were criticized quite a bit for what they did. They indeed became sort of like political bosses, at least on the surface. But in our interview, we found that they indeed provided services to the Mexican-American community in Dallas, that they were involved with the NAACP, and that the media had really wronged them by their sort of macro interpretation of what they were doing politically in Dallas, because basically they were providing the services that the Dallas Citizens Council and white politicians had never provided the African-American community. Again, I'm going to show a couple clips with Robert talking about some of the things that they did in terms of addressing police brutality, addressing immigration issues, addressing the fact that addressing school segregation, and of course, trying to provide the Mexican-American and the African-American community the same services that whites expected, or just you know, on a regular basis. But again, I'm deferring to the students, because you can actually go to the site yourself. And so I'm just sort of trying to pique your interest here. Go look at the Medrano interviews and some of the clips, and you'll see what I'm talking about. That where they're called political bosses and corrupt, they are actually serving the community in a way that the community had never been served before. And so I'll stop there and say, again, an old dog has learned some new tricks. Yes.
And just quickly before we get to discussion, I just want to draw your attention again to the website. You got to watch us play with it a little bit. But you go to the homepage, it randomly generates some images for you. Oh, look, we've gotten 3 new likes during the session. We got to get to 500. Somebody like us. Go up on Facebook. You can like us. You can follow the project, get updates. When you come to the site, right, you can just do a search here. You can browse by some of our different subject headings. There's a subject cloud. You can, if you want to go in that way. And then once you pick one of those, you can drill it down by any of these other sub-subjects, by locations, by various tags that are involved. You can keep sorting until you find those 5 clips about the sit-ins in Tyler, if that's what you're interested in. Right? And then you can actually write a paper with lots of different voices. You could have a newspaper article. You could have, I suppose, a legal brief that starts with some of those anecdotes. Right? We also have a map visualization we're still kind of playing with. That's another way you can search. And you notice there's some audio-only interviews. That's what these microphones are. And when we watched any of them, right, on the right-hand side, it generates similar clips with similar metadata, so you can browse that way. And after you've been browsing for a while, you can go up here and do browse, and it recommends based on your own personal browsing history, just like Amazon. Right? So we're trying to make oral history research that easy. It won't show up in 2 days at your doorstep, but you can use the interviews however you want, and the full files will be on the portal to Texas History once that's going for people who do want to get really crazy with the research and have the whole body there. So please do like us on Facebook, use the project, find new subjects, and let's. We have 20 minutes to talk, so please. What do you want? Someone like this? Oh, look at that. You haven't liked it yet?
What? How are you employed by the project and not like the...
It was just his last post.
I'll also say, I invite you all, if you have interviews that you want to contribute, let us know. If you want to come work with the project, if you live somewhere that we might not have gotten to and you want to do piecework for us, let us know. Right, we'd love to get you involved however you'd like. So you can reach us through the website, crbb@tcu.edu. My website's professormax.org. You can find me that way. So yeah, let's talk. Yes, sir.
First, let me tell you how impressed I am with your young people there. I remember when I was that smart, you know. In 3 years, it will be 50 years since the United States Commission on Civil Rights had its first hearing on Mexican-American civil rights problems in San Antonio. Before that, the commission was very, very involved, and we all applaud this involvement in the black civil rights movement, primarily in voting rights, public accommodation, and so forth. Now, I came from Washington to San Antonio to help run the hearings on a 6-month assignment. 6 months, and I never left. In that whole 50-year period, I have seen so many changes, so many things that I don't even know that you young people realize that it used to be a crime to speak Spanish on school grounds. One young lady said that every time they caught her speaking Spanish, they would charge her 5 cents a word. 5 cents a word. Whatever happened to the 5 cents, I don't know. But once she reached 1,000 words, then she had to bring her parents in to talk to the principal. Now, I just spent 6 years in Guatemala teaching at the university, and I had the transcript, and the more I read, the madder I got. I had forgotten all that, how bad it was. Now, where you all come in, or let me propose an idea, we're going to have some function, I don't know what it's going to be, an event, a conference or something, in San Antonio in 3 years. Father Hesper from Notre Dame was the vice chairman of the commission. And we weren't an enforcement authority. We weren't part of the Justice Department. All we could do was gather information and make recommendations to the President of Congress. And we were catching hell from everybody. Even our local congressman was criticizing it. So he said, look, all we do is we come to a community, we hold up a mirror, and the people talk, and you look at the mirror and you see what it is. So what I'd like to do is have a conference. I even thought of a name called 50 Years Later, Holding Up the Mirror, a study in social change. But we need people to come and document that, not just like you're doing here, which is fantastic, but photography, recordings, everything. And if you'd like to keep in touch, my name is Richard Avena at yahoo.com, and the reason I don't give you my cell number is I didn't know how to use a cell phone before. When I got back, my daughter's teaching me how to use a cell phone, but it would be overloaded. But if you want to reach me, and I talked to Jose Angel about it, he told me he was going to talk to you, and we could meet sometime. But it'd be a fantastic study. What's happened in 50 years? Hold up the mirror again 50 years later. Has anything changed? Sure, a lot of things have changed. Is everything perfect? No, by a long shot. And do, something like that. And I'd love to discuss it with you all and get yourselves or other people involved in it.
Yeah,
Thank
sounds
you very
great.
much.
Yes, thank you.
And by the way, this goes for anybody else in the audience that would like to get involved.
Please contact us and I'll give you a card too. I may,
Yeah, I had a question for Catherine.
Sure.
About Ms. Rizzo. So you said she participated in different conferences. Did she mention anything about or let me ask this first. When was she participating in one of these conferences? Like what, was this in the 70s? Or?
Yes, this was the one in Houston. There were two in Houston. One was in 72 and the other is 75, I think. And then the one that I actually didn't get a chance to ask her about, the one that I wanted to ask her about, but got so taken off guard and kind of off track with the one where she dealt with domestic violence, was a conference that she was organizing for women of color in Dallas, and it was in 1977. Yeah.
Because I was just wondering if she was at that was a women's conference.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
She was, and unfortunately, since we came back with 115 interviews, I haven't gotten a chance to process that interview yet, but it's on my schedule, so it's going to be processed hopefully next week. So, yeah, no problem.
I forgot to say that Catherine's the real brains of the operation and keeps everything running, so thanks to Catherine for that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had some context for you all. You talked about Kingsville and its importance. Have you talked to Israel Reina yet?
Yes,
Yes,
we
sir.
had 2 interviews with him.
Okay, he's old,
Yes.
your friend. Yeah, he's into all that. And of course, you missed her, but Adelpha Callejo was so wonderful for you as far as the
Yes.
Latino.
We did miss her. We did miss her. We were trying to set that up, but and she passed before we could get to her. Like I
had a
had,
chance to go back and read her history.
yeah, I had her scheduled, and she canceled, and we never got back with her. Yeah.
To some extent, we are having to work with other people's older interviews when in those kinds of cases, and we're trying to fold those in whenever we can also. Thank you. Other questions, comments, whatever?
So this is for anyone of you who did the project. What was one of the things that really stood out to you as you were doing the oral history? Like, what's something that you took away aside from from the research? What was something that really struck you in doing the research?
I can go at it first, I guess. To me, it was the fact that a lot of the people that we interviewed are still very active in the community. And I think that as a Chicana historian myself, it kind of made me look back as in well, what am I doing for my community, right? Yeah, I'm writing about them, but what am I really doing for my community? So that really has been in the back of my head the whole time, right? The people that we interviewed, a lot of them have gone through so much being activists in their own communities, and they've lost things, they've struggled, but they continue doing it because they have a passion for bettering, their social, political, and economic worlds around them. And so for me, that just amazed me, that they have so much perseverance to continue going on, and that in turn motivated me to be more involved in my community, especially it's hard as you're dissertating, right, and trying to be connected with your community, but to me that is something that I'm going to take away from this project and be part of as I continue on in my career.
I think.
At the very beginning, you gave the interviews of a couple of black folks talking about Latinos. But I didn't see one about Latinos talking to black folks about black folks. Do you have something in there?
Yes.
Yes. The majority was talking about black folks, by the way. Yeah.
We asked most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of a standard question we asked everybody.
This project seems really timely. I know up in New York, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies is putting together a similar project with similar sort of metadata information on, but it is not focused specifically on black and brown in that sense, but it's just sort of a larger Puerto Rican history project. You guys may want to talk to them just to compare notes. But specifically on the issue of black and brown, it seems like this particular project is coming out exactly at the right time because there's been an explosion of literature recently about the black and brown experience. I think is Opie, upsetting the apple cart. He has sort of a very unique take in the issues about food and how it integrates social movements with food. Sonia Lee teaches out of St. Louis, building a Latino civil rights movement. And while it's not about black and brown, it's about brown and brown, Lilia Fernandez.
Yeah, brown in the Windy City.
Which is about Puerto Ricans and Mexicans. So I applaud you guys. You guys are, this is right in the wheelhouse. You guys are hitting it at just the right time.
To go back to the answer to the question about what struck each of you the most, and I think, David, you would.
Oh, sorry. I think, as a historian, we read a lot of books. We read a lot of these, especially for Chicano Civil Rights, we read a lot about these experiences. But when you're sitting down in front of this individual who went through such a traumatic event, and they start crying, it hits you where you try to act tough, you're like, oh my God, okay. But I think, when we interviewed an individual who had walkouts, we were talking about, how they made him beg to, the students were expelled, they made him beg to go back to class. And she starts tearing up, and I started tearing up, and I'm like, and I was tearing up. I was like, I hope Sandra doesn't see me, right? But I go like that, I just go like that. But it was just, to me, I think that's what I learned. We can read it, we can read these experiences, but until we, sit down and talk to them, you can really feel what they went through. And, to me, that was a very, very, good learning experience.
And just quickly, I think that's the beauty of having the videos uploaded too, because in the transcript or in the voice recording, you can hear it, but it's not the same. You can actually see emotion, and that makes you, connected or get connected with the person that you're interviewing. I mean, sometimes I felt like clapping or yaying, or like
you can hear in some of the.
You can probably do it, and you can hear in the interviews. But I think that as an audience, seeing the video, right, as an outsider, it really grasps your attention, and it really makes you connect with the person that you're trying to study.
I know for me, everything they're saying, of course, and speaking to activists who were there on the front lines in the 60s and 70s is really huge. But I also found this new importance, and as my talk suggests, of like non-activists, of just working people who said, oh, I didn't really do anything important, and then they start talking to you on the phone about everything that they saw and did. It's like, okay, well, let's get this on tape, please. And we got these just wonderful insights of just how things just worked, like daily, like as people who got up in the morning, went to work, 10, 12 hours, came back, raised a family. Like I saw this whole new, I gained this whole new appreciation for those sorts of, recollections of that time period we're focusing.
I have another question.
Catherine?
Civil rights in black and brown, with us specifying time frames. Why, were there any young people that you talked to that were involved politically, that had a history of involvement? Most of the people that showed there were, I was over 50 or something like that. So were there any young folks that are doing anything that kind of thing?
Yeah, but I think Catherine wanted to answer the previous one, and then I can.
So let's put a pin in that question if you want to finish.
Oh, I kind of forgot what I was going to say.
Okay.
I was getting ready to answer his question
Go
now.
ahead.
But, our main goal was to get the most senior activists before they passed on. But we did actually we did conduct a couple of interviews with, I believe our youngest was 40, and he was the NAACP president of the Tyler chapter of his name is Cedric Granberry, and I believe he was about 40 years old. But that was our goal, was to really try to get some of the oldest ones first, some of the ones that, within a few years maybe we wouldn't have the opportunity to get to. So yes, majority of the ones up here right now are older, but we also do have some younger activists as well.
Yeah, we did a partnership recently with the city of Fort Worth as part of the Latino Americans film screening, public programming projects. We got a grant with them, and did interviews where people came to us, and we just collected local history, and Mo's building a website, another website that's going to feature that story. But during the course of those interviews, we had two different people who were either third or fourth generation Mexican-American activists. And they were both, I think the older one was in his 30s and was a high school principal, and the other one was in his 20s and worked in some kind of social service context. And that was really interesting, and I think as we keep working on it, we're going to get more and more of those as well. But as Catherine said, the priority is on the people who we're going to lose. we don't want to lose them.
And I just remembered my answer to Jaime's question.
Yeah,
So, sorry, it's been a long week. But what I guess what I took away from it was just, and it's kind of corny and cliche, was just to expect the unexpected. Because I feel like anytime I went into an interview expecting it to go a certain way, it always changed courses. It, new questions would be asked. They would tell a story about, working in a labor union, and we were like, wait, we were here to talk about this one, parents organization. What do you mean you were in a labor union and you brought your kids to strikes? So it was just always like, it was always expect the unexpected and be okay with it kind of going off course and just seeing where it's going to take you. So.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
I was just curious, y'all doing your research and interviews, was there anything that you came across where you could tell, like during the interviews, like you noticed that, hey, this is something that person said that is not in a textbook, it's not in a literature or in an article? Do y'all ever have that kind of experience?
Yeah, I think with Sandra and now we interviewed an African-American woman in McAllen, right there by the Coca-Cola company, in that little neighborhood. It really kind of got me excited because, when we think about South Texas, especially the city of McAllen, the south side, we don't think about African-Americans. It's all Chicano, it's all working people, Mexican-Americans. But she was saying that, during the 30s and 40s, her father walked down from Houston to the valley. He went to Alice and then he walked the rest of the way, and that he worked as a field hand, and that he started learning Spanish, and he talked to a lot of the individuals, a lot of the older the parents, and his kids, which includes her, the lady, spoke Spanish, got along with the Mexicanos. But what was really interesting, we went to do an interview in San Benito.
Mm-hmm.
And this individual was talking about how his father used to work as well in the fields, and that they mentioned that there was an African American family, that spoke very good Spanish, and they were always going around, and I kind of geeked out because I've never really heard that, I've never really experienced that, in a sense, running through an article or books that I've read, that there was African American families that did speak Spanish, that did kind of take in the customs, of the Mexican American culture. Children did play along together. But of course, it was like one or like maybe about 1%, the population. But still, it was something. That's what I took away from it.
Anyone else want to comment on that?
There was just a lot of that, really. It's like, I always walked away from every interview. I always said, wow, I learned a lot. And it wasn't just a formality that I, wrapped up interviews with. I really did just, learn so much. I would end, the interviews with pages of notes. And, things would just, going off what Catherine said, like, we would walk away with more questions sometimes. Things that, we didn't originally expect to hear from, newspapers or that sort of thing that just pop up out of nowhere.
I have another question about like the technical aspects of doing the interviews. How did so y'all worked in teams, right?
Mm-hmm.
Y'all did to each area, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did you decide who was going to do which interview? Like, did you?
It just depends. Like sometimes, I can answer. No, sometimes we, like in Laredo, we just didn't have like the knowledge, so we were really afraid, and we were trying to catch up on everything that we could, right, on literature and on people. So sometimes like we would just be like, okay, it's your turn, or it's my turn, or
I'll buy you lunch.
Like, or if we were interested or had a previous knowledge about that particular subject. And then this came when David's doing research in McAllen and South Texas and the Valley, and I'm doing research in El Paso. So most of the El Paso interviews were done by me, whereas like not most, but like a lot of them were done by David, and it just depending on the interest and stuff.
And also I think the issue of gender also
Yeah,
came in.
so-
Like when we had an interview about talking about women's studies or I had her tell me, of course, because I wouldn't know what to ask. If I did ask, it probably sound wrong. So it also depend on that. But other than that, we would just we would rotate, or we just do paper rock scissors sometimes.
Moises and I had a pretty good system where we just alternated back and forth. So I would do one, he would do the next. And unless there was an interview that we worked really hard to get, or maybe we had more knowledge about a certain subject than another, Sometimes we would go back to back, but most of the time we would alternate, and it worked out. I think it worked out very well. I don't want to speak for you, but
I agree
yeah,
completely.
so.
Yeah.
And I also think that having the small group, right, and the process of doing the interview kind of seemed intimidating because we had a camera, microphones, they had lapel microphones on them, and so people were sometimes intimidated. But then after a while, they forgot about the camera, and just having the two people, I think that if it were more than like 3, 4, 5, then people would not have gotten the same experience. But the good thing about having a team, having a partner, was that if you missed something, or like if you didn't go back to it, then the other person picked it up, and then we would go, and probe that question. So it was really, even though someone was leading the interview, it was a team effort too.
Yeah, I think we would either pass papers to each other, or we like,
Yeah,
there's
we kinda
a
like,
natural
"Hey,
break,
you're
like,
missing
can
this,"
I
or
come
"Hold
in?
on,"
And
yeah.
it's really nice.
Any other comments, questions?
Very good.
Oh,
wait,
Yeah.
How well funded is this project? I got it.
You gotta talk to him.
Well, here you go. It's taken a lot of contributions from lots of different institutions and people. So we, and students and everybody else. We were able to do this with private funding that we had raised from these foundations, and then also from our in-kind contributions from the universities. And so we just got awarded the NEH grant from their collaborative research program to the tune of $200,000. And we're raising matching funds for that. So altogether, I think we'll be probably close to $500,000 of external funds raised when we're all said and done. And then, of course, there's all kinds of in-kind. So we're going to have a symposium in which we're creating a multi-authored book out of the project, and we're going to have a symposium of the Walter Prescott Webb Lectures at UT Arlington, which has its own large budget that they've donated to us for an entire year to work on the project. So, the Portal to Texas History is contributing. We've gotten all kinds of different contributions.
Have you been thinking of adding a donation?
Yeah.
Click here to donate.
Yeah, I think we will. But as you can see, we have 1,000 clips on here right now, and 99 interviewees, and probably half of those are from older projects, not even from the summer work. So we have a long ways to go in building it still.
I think if I dig around in my boxes, I might find a bunch of interviews. I might even have one with a Pacaevo. So
that'd be great.
We would love any contributions from all of you.
I want that.
Brian Bankin gave us his interviews. A lot of people are giving us interviews, and we're trying to figure out how to streamline our processing operation. But TCU's library has been a huge contributor of resources, of people, and equipment and so forth. Our college bought us equipment. Because apparently the liberal arts people never ask for money for equipment. So they're like, yay, somebody has an equipment. So, we've been fortunate to do that and to get so much support from our homes. And we really want it to be a statewide study, to be comprehensive, and probably maybe someday beyond that. And for it to be interinstitutional. Maggie Rivas Rodriguez is joining us as another collaborator. We're hiring students, as you can see, from all over the state, and we hope to continue to do that, and really, not just for our own largesse, but rather because we value local knowledge, right? That's what the program's all about, and so we want people who have done the work before us to contribute any way they can. So yeah, thank you. All right, I think we can stop there, and just thank all of you for spending your afternoon with us, and please do visit the site.
That's good. Not bad for wing.
I know, right? I kind of jotted some notes down in that last session, so I would have something to say. But yeah.
Have the come here.
Oh, my script, so don't